Hey friends, what I want to do in this video is I want to discuss the issue of meaning. I saw something today that I'd never thought that I'd ever see online, which is that meaning doesn't exist, right? Meaning doesn't exist. Now, I'm not trying to say anybody is stupid, right? This falls in line with sort of my most recent post online where I said, quote, one of my most recent insights on an issue that I've struggled with for years was the realization that language is always, the realization that the idea rather, that language is always a kind of overlay on top of consciousness is itself an idea. So most language doesn't touch issues of spiritual enlightenment, but some does. It's not a lot, right? But there is language that touches or refers to the existential or to being or goes with it. The problem is some people take language too seriously, some people not seriously enough. So it's more nuanced than language is always a semantic layer sitting on top of consciousness. That is a kind of duality. Language goes with consciousness. So when people say meaning doesn't exist, it's like who's fooling who here? Because why would you say it? Why would you believe in that? Why would you? It's like saying that somebody lacks self-sovereignty. Right? I mean, these are out of bounds stupid things to say. And I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm just saying that when you post things, you need to make sure, right, that you're not saying things that are just way out there, right? I mean, just like saying red is blue, 3 is 4, hope is despair. I mean, anybody can do that. Anyone who just wants to be a kind of a, say something without really saying anything true. But of course meaning exists. Of course meaning exists. If meaning didn't exist, you wouldn't say anything. You wouldn't have the need to say anything. You wouldn't need to read anything either if meaning didn't exist. Why would you ever read a book? Why would you ever talk to somebody, really? I mean, you would just kind of behave like a dog almost. But even a dog has meaning, right? I mean, it might not have conceptual meaning, but it knows. It has a sort of, more feminine, more animalistic, more sort of bodily understanding of meaning. So meaning isn't just conceptual. Meaning is also intuitive, and it's also bodily and heart. There's meaning that goes with heart too. So there's body, heart, and mind. But I think the proposition here is that the mind meaning doesn't exist. Well, then why argue about anything? If you really believed that, okay, now maybe you're sitting back as consciousness and you're watching yourself in the dream, right? Arguing about all this shit. And you're sitting there and you're going, this is samsara. I hate this about my life. I'll challenge you on one thing. There's not really a clear distinction between you and the character in the dream. Let me rephrase that. You is a meaning and a construction. So non-duality is a meaning and a construction. But experience is not a meaning and it's not a construction. You have to be able to notice the difference between things. Like a taste is not a taste is not a meaning, right? So you stick a spoon into a sauce and you taste it. The meaning comes after the experience. So I think, some people, it is an epistemology issue. I think some people really gloss over epistemology But there really is a difference between and a relation with experience and semantics, or the existential and the semantic, or the relational and the semantic. So, going back to that quote that I made, I feel like we have this like kind of tier one dichotomy between the existential and the semantic. And, once you get beyond stage yellow, including but not limited to stage yellow, you'll realize, no, right, there's a little bit of meaning in being, and there's a little bit of being in meaning. Meaning exists on some level. You're correct to put it under suspicion, but to say that meaning doesn't exist or that you don't exist, that's way too, like, you're actually taking your meaning to be the truth, but then you're saying that there is no meaning because you don't want to be criticized. So it's a tier one game, actually. This is exactly how tier one operates. So this is all by way of just a kind of a prefatory introduction. What I want to do in this video, though, I'm going to switch the theme a little bit on you, play a little bit with this. I want to explain why people miss spiritual enlightenment, and I also want to explain how enlightenment and growth work together. So let's see if I can do this in a 30-minute video. It's going to be challenging, but we'll try. Just give me 1 second. Welcome back, friends. So what I want to do in this part is I want to propose a thesis that actually I've held for a long time. And it's something that's probably going to piss everybody off, right, who's into spiritual enlightenment. But those of you guys who know me, you know that I don't really care about that, right? I don't care about truth necessarily. I care about channeling, right? Being honest, but then some of it doesn't stand, right? Some of it I judge later on as like, okay, well, this isn't the best art for my audience. But some things stay the same, like some tropes stay the same. So I'm kind of working within a genre, right? As an artist, as a conscious creator. And so I have certain tropes that are part of my bag, so to speak. Like a jazz musician has a bag of tricks. A chef has a bag of tricks. So what I'm going to be doing in this part of the video is kind of giving you guys an insight into my bag of tricks. And basically, one of the most recent insights that I've had is that there's not really a bright line distinction between spiritual enlightenment and development work. So in other words, there's a little bit of development work and spiritual enlightenment. There's a little bit of spiritual enlightenment and development work. Kind of very stage yellow on up the spiral, right? Both and. We want to draw bright lines, but actually, one of the things about meaning is that it is, in many cases, a pointer, although there's a spectrum of the accuracy of the reference. It's not all the same. Some meanings are dead on. Some meanings are vague and ambiguous, right? It's not all the same. So what I did is, I basically been studying personal development, self-help work now for, since 2014, really heavily. Before that too. And I would say around 2017 when I joined Leo's forum, actualize.org, I started really working on this stuff and learning from him a lot about, introduction to spiritual enlightenment, kind of stuff like that. And from that point on, so from the last 8 years or so, I've been journaling like crazy, making a bunch of crazy videos, doing psychedelics, traveling around the world. Lots of things. And working different kinds of jobs, trying to work on my art, trying to expand my artistry, trying to find my own voice in my own art. So then the issue of conscious creation emerged. And understand that, I have a philosophical background. So my path is going to be more like a jhana or jnana yogi, right? I'm a 4-wing 5, right, in terms of Enneagram. So I have a philosophical background. So my way of pointing to spiritual enlightenment is going to be my path, which is already pretty philosophical. So I fully believe that the way that to teach spiritual enlightenment is basically just to share your own path. That's what keeps you as uncorrupted as possible. Just be honest to your path. But I can sort of codify in a way using meaning. We might call them stages of development that I like to honor, because I feel like I went through these actually, just like, you go through spiral dynamic stages. And I felt like this was a part of my path. And so it actually makes me really excited to be able to unify enlightenment and growth work, instead of thinking that enlightenment has nothing to do with development work, or development work has nothing to do with enlightenment. See, that's a limiting belief. That doesn't mean meaning doesn't exist. You don't have to be that extreme about it. Of course meaning exists. But this is where epistemology and judgment come into. I mean, Kant's third critique was a critique of judgment. Immanuel Kant, his third critique was a critique of judgment, where he gets into aesthetics. He gets into a lot of the issues that I'm talking about here. And even though I'm not a huge fan of Kant as a philosopher, he dealt with these issues. It's the issues that don't die in philosophy. The perspectives are born and die. It's just like in food. Deliciousness doesn't change, right? In music, something sounding good doesn't change. It's just the vehicles of these things that change. It's the genres, the history of the changing genres that change. But Plato, in a way, was kind of a genius, because he realized that maybe there is a form of beauty, there's a form of truth, there's a form of the good that don't change, a form of truth that doesn't change. Why? Because no matter how many genres come and go, the music you like you think is good regardless, right? The genres almost seem like kind of an afterthought. But then the genres are important because every jiva that's creating in absolute infinity of perspective is operating according to its own personality, strengths, purpose, values, traumas, you name it, right? And so, you can't be so detached in the absolute to think that you can completely ignore working on the way you're showing up in the dream as a character. There's a little bit of the absolute and the relative, and a little bit of the relative and the absolute. So that sort of being stated as a thesis, let me now spend the last 5 minutes of this video basically summarizing, my theory regarding this. And I'm going to do it quickly because I've made extensive videos on this, but I think if I do it quickly, it'll have more impact, because you don't need to know the details to see what I'm trying to do here. So just give me 1 second. All right, friends, welcome back. So let's do it like this. So spiral dynamics basically stops with turquoise. And I consider turquoise to be kind of like Spinoza. It's about non-duality. It's about transcending the ego, transcending the individual. And so that's, basically stage turquoise. And then my next proposed stage after turquoise is coral. And I consider the pointer here to be Advaita Vedanta. So this is where you really start getting into solipsism, consciousness, right? The self-realization. And then, so these two stages, turquoise and coral, I consider to be the truth stages. These are like the philosophical stages, the jnana or higher knowledge stages. So it's still very much attached to the conceptual, although it doesn't acknowledge it as such. These people don't realize that they're really philosophers at heart, right? They're stopping with philosophy. So after this, you have what I call teal, which is characterized by Carl Jung. And this is where you really start working on intuition and shadow work. Like you start moving back, you start realizing that the duality between the absolute and the relative has a wobble to it. And so you have to deal with your character in the dream, and so therefore you have to engage that honestly, and you have to kind of work on yourself. So self-improvement comes back into the bodily sort of work that you do here. So you're integrating the body, whereas with turquoise and coral, you're integrating the mind. So the next stage, which I call mauve after teal, is characterized by Zen, and this is basically detachment and process, and not emptiness, but emptying. There's a difference between emptiness and emptying. So when, like, Indian Buddhism is about emptiness, it's an ideology. Zen is about emptying, right? That's not an ideology. It's about detachment. It's about process. So there's a big difference. I don't even like to call Zen Buddhism for this reason. All right, so this is mauve, and this is and then the next stage I call emerald, and this is the relational. This is when you start integrating the relational. So you start integrating love, or what I call holistic telos, which is purpose, divine purpose. So people who realize love is the most important thing, right? I mean, everything else seems like nonsense except for family, relation, even relation to everyone and everything, right? This is your heart awakening, right? So very high level, I call it emerald. And then following emerald, I have dusty rose, which is basically where you integrate power and freedom. So you realize that, yes, you are attached to ego. You're always going to be attached to ego. You're always going to be attached to survival. And you start to see the corruption in yourself, right? And you realize that your projection of corruption onto everybody else is dishonest. Right? The corruption lies within, and the corruption is good, right? It's part of what's here. And even though it is corruption. So you have a puritanical attitude, a judgmental, you're neurotic, you have this judgmental attitude, right? But what this leads to is freedom. This leads to not even and to what I call peace. So not even is the antidote to neuroticism. So in neuroticism, you're constantly hung up by meaning, actually. So it's not that meaning doesn't exist, but you can be hung up with regarding to meaning. And you misunderstand what your jiva character is doing and what you're actually contributing. So you might think, oh, I'm teaching the world spiritual enlightenment, when really actually what you're trying to do is make money, right? Just like everybody else. Because what does teaching the world spiritual enlightenment actually mean? So freedom is about, it's not that life is a tragedy or a comedy. There's a little bit of the tragedy in the comedy and a little bit of the comedy in the tragedy. Right? It's not one or the other, it's both. See? So there really is a little bit of meaning and being and a little bit of being and meaning. And I think people, they have this kind of tier one mentality where they think it's an exclusive or, right, between one versus the other in terms of meaning. And then they don't even really have a realistic account of meaning either. So be careful with meaning, but also honor meaning too. Like, meaning is something that, you can't be a conscious creator without some kind of a trope. What are you gonna create? Nothing out of something, right? You can't do it. Try to create food that's not food, or music that's not music, right? As soon as you start saying that you're going to create something, you're already within karma. You're within samsara, so you're within the power structures that govern the succession when one thing follows another, and the order of things, and what we consider to be valuable and what we don't consider to be valuable, personally and interpersonally too. Okay, friends, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. I'll come back and we'll do the final 10 minutes. Just give me 1 second. All right, so I want the last third of this video to be a compassionate elaboration of why I think career spiritual teachers miss spiritual enlightenment tragically. And the answer is because they're focused on being a teacher. And so they are heavily invested in meaning and heavily invested in semantics. Heavily attached to their own language, which becomes their teachings. They distract themselves actually from what spiritual enlightenment actually is. Spiritual enlightenment is, it's a journey. It's a journey that does demand a certain amount of clarity, because meaning is important. So for example, if you're so neurotic where your meaning is just buzzing around all over the place, you never gain a kind of clarity that comes from silence, right? Like, spiritual teachers who will tell you to shut up and just love, right? See, that's the relational kind of coming in to check her man of the existential and the semantic, the feminine. You get so caught up in philosophy that you have so many ideas that you can't find the true ones anymore. It's like your mind gets burned out. It's like, imagine you're like a chef and you eat like every cuisine. You're like, man, I'm going to become this great chef. I'm going to eat every cuisine. I'm going to learn how to cook every cuisine. But then you never find out what your voice is as a chef. You never listen to find out what you like to eat and what you like to cook. And spiritual enlightenment is more like the second one, right? It's development work, in part. Or else, why would you learn it? Why would you care about it? You would do something else. So, teachers have to realize that they do have a corruption. They have an ulterior motive. Because they're trying to impress their client. Just like I try to impress my clients as a paralegal. Although my clients are my friends, more and more. I'm trying to get around that issue. I hate that shit. I hate that stage orange. I'm telling you, right? It's the bane of my existence. Is dealing with hierarchical stupidity. I'm not ashamed to admit that. To the extent that I can find passion to do my work and to help people, and to come from a place of like not needing anything from anybody, just kind of, being loving, delivering, kind of like I'm helping my friends. That's where I want to be coming from. See, that's the relational, that's heart, right? So you need heart. And once you start integrating the heart, some of this philosophical stuff does have to die, right? Just because, you realize relationships are messy and they're full of conflict and full of paradox and uncertainty, right? Which the masculine oftentimes doesn't like or want, which makes him neurotic, makes him feel like he needs to be on a mission to like save everybody, because he fundamentally doesn't feel loved or loving, which makes him feel corrupt, and then he's like projecting that onto other people. So I would say, those of you who really are interested in spiritual enlightenment, I really do think that there are 3 kind of zones, 3 genres that you can work on. One is the body. So this is the existential, being in the world, getting your personal self-help stuff together, but doing it like with your own voice and on your own timetable, and standing up for yourself, and also allowing yourself to be helped, through community. And then there's the relational, which is learning how to pay it forward, but in a genuine way. Right? See, this is where like marketing people and sleazy people kind of fuck this all up. They're basically trying to be a good dude, but not be a good dude. Just to put it in plain, you know what I mean? They're not being themselves and being a good dude. They're being a good dude manipulatively. Okay. And then you have the semantic, right? Which is the person who is like so conceptual, right? It's like they went to college, they have a high vocabulary, they think about every side to every problem. They're at least stage yellow, right, on the spiral. Usually, they could be stage green and stage orange. And not really, usually not stage blue. Usually college weans you off of stage blue. But sometimes these people have head in the clouds syndrome, right? Where it's just like, dude, you don't have to be fair and ethical all the time. It's like you're too humble. You don't have enough kind of ability to say, I ain't your bitch, right? Like, fuck you. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to say something crude, right? So you're missing that part of it. So the existential is actually kind of informed by the semantic. And then this is where like spiral dynamics and my extended, stages actually help you, is because you can have a meaning layer as to charting a path toward development that goes with spiritual enlightenment for you. So it's about putting it all together. And ultimately, I think it's about what my life purpose is, which is to help take deep dives on issues and projects to help myself and others accept ourselves and others by use of the mind. So I do think that there's a role for intellect mastery and for meaning in this work, obviously. Or else why say anything at all? And we're not sure that meaning sits up over on top of consciousness either. That's an assumption. That's an idea. Okay, friends, hopefully this was a good video. What I'm attempting to do here is to kind of dissolve a certain kind of limiting belief that it has to be one way or another way without seeing, no, it can be both. All right, friends, I'll talk to you soon. Take care.